On this week's episode of Nintendo Noise, we're talking about Donkey Kong Bananza. What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 184 of Nintendo Noise, Slipscreen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Jack Ryan.
I'm Pete and Bessie. I'm the king of Nerd Mountain. No, I'm just playing.
What an honor. The king? I'm royalty?
Look at you.
What does that make you, the court jester?
Yeah, I'm in line. I'm somewhere in there. I think Kenneth's probably next to the heir, but
I'm in the line of secession.
I've got a tertiary degree of royal lineage.
I'm a minor duchy of Nerd Mountain. So, speaking of which, you minor duchy of Nerd Mountain, you came with today's topic, which was you wanted to have a little Donkey Kong Bananza hype check. Because, of course, you know, I think the game on everybody's lips, right, is Mario Kart because it's going to be there day one. But I think I, and a lot of other players are honestly maybe a little bit more interested in Donkey Kong because it's the first big single-player game. It's, you know, not a new franchise, but a fresh take on the franchise for the first time in a while. I think it's a much less a known quantity, which makes it very interesting.
Yeah, I think my excitement is we're all wondering what's going to be the first Breath of the Wild of the Switch 2. We found that out on day one on the Switch, right?
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild of the Switch was Breath of the Wild. And I think Donkey Kong Bananza is the first game we've seen that could be. I'm not saying I think it is. I think it's the first game we've seen that has the potential to blow us away in ways that we weren't expecting, because it's just something that appears to be wildly different than anything we've seen from the franchise.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit in the episode we did maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago now. It was you, me, and Ken talking about, like, has Nintendo done enough to sell the Switch 2? And this idea that, like, there are certain things, right, that Switch had going for it that Switch 2 maybe doesn't. And one of the ones we highlighted was that Mario Kart, 8 Deluxe was such a, this is the best, most definitive version of Mario Kart thus far. And how does the next one feel like anything but a sophomore slump or more of the same or whatever? Whereas, this obviously doesn't have some other game's shadow looming over it, except for what, like Donkey Kong Country 64 from like 30 years ago.
That's probably the closest comparison, right?
Yeah, right? I mean, and there's, to my memory, right, there's no other 3D open world Donkey Kong titles or anything like that, right? The only other 3D titles we got were spin-offs,
Yeah, I think people in the know will probably go on to compare the game to Odyssey.
Yeah.
Just because, for obvious reasons, right? Same development team. Visually, I think a lot in common in certain ways.
Yeah, I see that.
And yeah, the same kind of thinking of let's just make it as explorable as possible. Mario Odyssey did that through traversal, and Bonanza looks to do that through environment destruction, which sounds awesome. But I think that's the only game you can use to compare what we've seen so far of Donkey Kong Bananza, because it is not anything like Donkey Kong 64 or any other Donkey Kong game.
Yeah, it's like all of the other games I can think to compare it to are games that are very different than Donkey Kong, Yeah,
exactly.
Which is definitely interesting. Like, I think if you tuned into the year one predictions episode that you and I did, like, before that April Direct, we did a bunch of different episodes where we were talking about, like, kind of what we might see in that first year. Like, I've predicted the 3D Donkey Kong game coming to pass multiple times, right, on different prediction shows, because it's like that rumor has been circling for so long. And, I think this was definitely not necessarily what I expected from it, right? Like, it's a different approach than what I think probably anyone would have expected from, when you hear a new 3D Donkey Kong game, right? It's like your mind probably goes to the only other example we have, and you're imagining it being more traditional collectathon. And I'm not sure that it isn't that, but the destructive environments and like how much that seems to be kind of the core mechanic of the game is definitely something that feels in line with, I guess, what we saw with like Tears of the Kingdom and like the way that game is so focused on verticality.
Yeah, so did you I know you were like pretty gung-ho about it, I remember, during that predictions app. And I know you were following the rumors like pretty closely, at least a lot more closely than me. Did you know that it was the Super Mario Odyssey team? Or did that come as a surprise?
So the rumor was that they had made an internal Donkey Kong team from EAD or EPD, whichever one it is. That's the Odyssey, cohort. So I figured that it would have some crossover, but not that it would be like that exact same team.
Yeah, that was like my first reaction to the reveal of that game was this looks weirdly like Super Mario Odyssey, which was an amazing game. So I'm stoked to see what they do with a radically different design concept.
Yeah, and I think like not having as many constraints, because like I think to take it back to something we were talking about a minute ago with like I feel like Donkey Kong is in a very interesting spot right now as a franchise because it doesn't have, at least to my mind, I'm interested if you feel differently. I don't think it has a super strong identity in the way that other Nintendo franchises do. Like, I think if you like you brought up Breath of the Wild earlier, right? I think if you like use that as an example, Breath of the Wild and The Legend of Zelda on the NES are obviously like very different games in many ways. And I think to like the average observer, you might be like, how do these have anything in common? But I think if you're just trying to boil down what a Zelda game is in a few words, right? It would be about exploration. It would be about discovery. It would be about, having the ability to overcome obstacles with like just what you're given in the beginning of the game. But if you invest time in, exploring the world and finding its secrets, that you're rewarded and that will give you different ways to play and different ways to tackle problems. And like, you can see how they were able to boil those ideas down and kind of quote unquote return to the franchise's roots while also doing something that was totally new and revolutionary in its own right. And I think you can do that with most of the iconic Nintendo franchises is like you can kind of boil down what they are, quote unquote, about in a few words, regardless of if that's the 2D versions, the 3D version, whatever, right? Like it's like there's some through line. Whereas with Donkey Kong, I feel like at this point, your touch point for what Donkey Kong is probably very, very dominated by how old you are. Because it's like, if you're older than us, your touch point is going to be like the classic arcade titles and stuff like Donkey Kong Jr. and all that stuff. If you're a little older than that, or like our age, whatever, right? Like you're probably thinking of like the Donkey Kong Countries and the the original 2D platformers, and then like the one random 3D game and being like a Mario supporting character, right? Like in tennis and party and kart and like all those kinds of experiences. And then it's like that weird rhythm game era where there's like no Donkey Kong stuff that isn't like goofy spin-off games. And then we have the 2D revival era. So it's like, what is the identity of Donkey Kong in a few words? I don't know what that is.
Yeah. First of all, it's interesting because Donkey Kong as a character, like as an IP, maybe the most it's ever been worth. Like he's in the Mario Bros movie, just got a theme park. Like there's a Donkey Kong world in Orlando, Florida right now, and Japan. But yeah, to your point, like what do kids associate that with when it comes to video games? Because all we really have through the past, 15 years is Tropical Freeze, Donkey Kong Country Returns 4 times on 4 different consoles.
Yeah.
Am I missing anything? I think that's the list.
I don't think you are, right? Like maybe one of those spin-off games is on the like tail end of that 15-year period. But point
Right.
being, I think to young players, yeah, like he's a Mario supporting character, right?
Yeah, but to answer the question, when I think of Donkey Kong, I think of platforming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not sure it's accurate, but I usually think of like difficult platforming. The Donkey Kong Country games are kind of the grown up platformer.
Yeah, I think they're a level up
For
from
Nintendo.
Mario for sure, right?
Yeah, and then the only other like consistent theme I think is music and rhythm. You said it as kind of a joke, like pointing at the Donkey Konga games, but music and like drum beats have always been kind of at the core of that series.
Yeah, I mean, you think about Donkey Kong 64, like each character has their own special instrument, right? As like part
Right.
of
Yeah.
their power set.
And surprise, and like it's funny because I don't think I saw any of that in the Treehouse coverage of Bonanza. Like one
No.
of the two things that I think identifies Donkey Kong doesn't seem to be a theme in this game. So yeah, it's in a weird spot. The character is very popular, but he doesn't really have an identity when it comes to video game software right now. I think at least to kids. You know, we grew up with the platformers. I think we associate it with that. But I'm not sure the kids are familiar with the platformers, and this
Yeah.
is going to be their first big introduction
And
to
I think
Donkey Kong.
even, for our generation, right? Like I think if you look at like the kind of like new Donkey Kong design and everything, right? Like we had that very like 90s like edgy rare kind of attitude that he had, and it kind of seems like they're moving away from that a little bit too, right? So it really does feel like, to your point, that it's like they're really throwing their weight behind trying to make him a pillar character in his own right again. And, it feels like this game is kind of their, starting point at establishing him having like kind of a new identity,
Yeah. I think establishing like kind of a gameplay identity for him, because you can play a platformer with Mario in it,
Right.
but you can't play a Mario game where the main purpose of the game is to destroy and dig and pound your way through stuff. So I think it is an interesting way to kind of set him up to be a unique gameplay mechanic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it sets him apart from Mario in a way that's important, considering he's become such a like so tied to Mario, that like I don't think you want it to just be the 2D platformer with a less popular character, I like the idea of trying, and not that I don't want to see more Donkey Kong Country games. Like I hope that franchise has a future as well, but I think in the same way that like 2D Mario and 3D Mario don't have a ton in common, that could be the future for Donkey Kong, that like we have the country titles that are for 2D platform enthusiasts, and maybe, his rising star power makes those even more popular. Great. There's clearly a market for those kinds of games considering how much Wonder sold. But but I do think that this is like a smart choice to do something that leans into, like his physicality, right? Like he's always presented as like this big, strong, hulking guy. He was the original heavy character in Smash, right? And it's like that doesn't ever really factor into his games in a significant way,
Yeah. I had a point in the middle of what you were saying, and I completely lost it. So I will yield the mic and give it back to you. And if it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
Well, then let me ask you a question, because I think we talked a little bit about the treehouse stuff. Of what we've seen, what is it here that appeals to you most, or that you found like most exciting or most interesting?
So I think it's a team that has proven they can make finding secrets extremely fun. Like possibly the most fun I've had looking for secrets in a collectathon in a video game ever. It's up there. Super Mario Odyssey for
Yeah.
me. Top 3 at a bare minimum. So I'm excited to see them take that idea of you find secrets by stretching the limits of your movement and your traversal, and finding ways to use the tools you're given to jump higher than you thought you could and reach this cliff or, hidden clove or whatever it is. I'm excited for them to take that kind of core theme and apply that to destroying your environment to find secrets. That just sounds incredibly fun. What we've seen already looks really cool. Just being able to kind of plow through the earth at will and dig your own tunnels and find your own solutions to reaching areas and breaking through objects, stuff like that. I'm just very impressed with their design philosophies, and I'm excited to see them apply that to something that is in the vein of Super Mario Odyssey, but also very different at the same time.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's cool that like you can see that DNA of like exploration and traversal and how that was handled in Odyssey, but like obviously just through such a character that interacts with the world in such a different way, right? Like I think of like the first time I saw footage for like New Donk City and some of the like, you know, the areas where they want you to really do like the crazy like triple jumps to try to get up to these like really crazy hidden areas or whatever. And I like the idea of like, you know, again, I guess to make the Tears of the Kingdom comparison, like it was so cool the way that game was like all of the marketing was about exploring the clouds, but then it's like there's also this entire sub underworld, and like I love the idea that like you could play through one of these levels and like maybe not discover an entire area, or that there might be like, you know, you and I could play the same level and have handled it two totally different ways using different abilities and stuff like that. Just because, I mean, that seems to be part of the kind of like elevator pitch here is like go at it at your own pace, and, you know, like just it's very much the Super Mario 64 thing of like you get in that open area, right, for the first time, and it's like just jumping around and interacting with the world is fun gameplay, and like that, you know, just invites you to want to keep digging and trying to find the next secret, and, you know, 100% every collectible item on each map or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's cool that, I don't know, I forget what they're called, like the superstar equivalent.
The moons?
They're bananas.
Oh, yeah.
We'll call them super bananas.
Sure.
I think it's cool that there could be 10 super bananas throughout a level, right? And you and me both play the game and collect our 10 bananas, and our maps look totally different by the end of it.
Right.
Like that's a really exciting concept. Just that everyone can kind of experience it differently, and it's wherever your brain goes is how you end up solving the puzzle and, you know, getting where you need to go.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of Nintendo's like real big strengths in terms of how they've approached.
Yeah, no, it has definitely. It's been pretty consistent throughout the Switch. When I think of the best first-party games on the Switch, the single-player like platforming stuff.
Yeah,
that's been a very central theme, and I'm really excited to see them continuing to push that and play around with it.
Yeah, it feels like the way that they go about it is like the way to inject new life into the formula, as it were, is to like, you know, just take as many restraints off the player as you can.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely the thing that like I'm most excited about, just kind of looking at it on its face, is that like it both feels like it's carrying the torch of the best ideas that we saw in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and Mario Odyssey, but in a very different approach to gameplay and exploration, which is really cool. I think the big question that I still have is kind of like, what is the moment-to-moment gameplay like, aside from the like, you know, the intro level that we've seen, which seems very like oriented around teaching you how to play and interact with everything, which is great. But it makes me wonder, kind of like, is this what we're doing on every level, and they're just like a lot of enemies, and like that's the thing? Are there going to be like platforming challenges that you can like work your way around in different ways? Like, you know, I'm interested, I guess, in like, it reminds me of when we saw Breath of the Wild the first time, and they were like talking about stuff like item degradation and like exploring the open world, and it's like, okay, like that's those are systems, right? But like, how are all of those systems interacting with one another? How off the leash am I? How different are the biomes and stuff like that? Because that was, I think, one of the big appeals of Odyssey, right? Was like every new world felt like a really unique, novel place to explore. And not that I'm like, that I have reservations about those things. They're just questions I don't think we've had answered in the like 40 minutes of opening gameplay that we've seen.
Yeah, we saw the tutorial of the game pretty much. Like, including that area after the tutorial still felt very kind of handholdy, meant to show you the ropes of how you interact with this world. I think there's a lot of questions I have about the identity of this game. My biggest question still is like, what makes this a Donkey Kong game? I know we already touched on the point, but I think the moment-to-moment gameplay that we saw, the appeal of it was, did you play Astro's Playroom? Or
I did.
The new one.
Astrobot. Yeah, I love that
game. Do you know the moment at the end of each level where they give you 5,000 little jingly trinkets on the ground, like 5,000 jelly beans or 5,000 little nuts and bolts that you get to spin through, and the physics go crazy, and it's the most satisfying thing on earth? I think that's the game. Yeah. And I think it's fair to expect there's going to be like some hidden gameplay variety and mini games and all the usual, Nintendo stuff here and there. But I think that's going to be the like moment to moment, place to place appeal, is you just get to smash everything in your way, see how different materials react to you punching through them, see how different stuff reacts to you, like throwing a soft wad of mud against a hard diamond. I guess kind of like Luigi's Mansion 3 in a way. A lot of the appeal was there are tens of thousands of little interactable things in the level. And the joy of that game to me is just like taking your vacuum up to a window curtain and just like sucking the window curtain off.
Yeah.
And then sucking like the coins out of the couch and seeing the cushions flap up and down. I think it's just like the charming little hyper attention to detail and interactivity with the world that's going to be a big piece of the game, at least. I think there's a lot more we haven't seen. Obviously, we've only seen the first 30 minutes of it, but
and I think that's like probably what makes it so interesting, is that like, because like we're struggling to think of another game to compare it to, like there is so much like question about like, what are those things, like, like what are the different like, tricks that they're going to try to throw at you to like, what, like, how do we explore the natural boundaries of what this mechanic is, right? In interesting and engaging ways. And I have like no doubt that they'll do that, right? Like, I think that's the thing we always praise Nintendo for, is like, it is having those really creative, unpredictable, unexpected kind of moments,
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna be like, okay, I drilled myself 500 feet underground, now what? Like, I'm surrounded by mud, north, east, south, and west. Great. Like, I think they're gonna do a good job of making it intuitive to find the stuff that's worth getting to. I don't think it's gonna be just like plowing through stuff for the sake of it. I'm confident that they're gonna find a lot of ways to make sure that you don't find yourself just like blind guessing what it is that you're supposed to be punching through or throwing stuff at or whatever it is.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, like the non-gameplay identity stuff, because I do think it's interesting, that it feels like we're kind of in this period where we're trying to like reestablish DK's character, right? And like they've softened the design a little bit. It feels like, like you mentioned that like there's no nod to like music or anything yet. I wonder how many of the kind of like key pieces of iconography are things that like make it through as we expect, or are they going to be maybe recontextualized? Like, I believe we saw Cranky right, during one of
I was gonna mention it.
the treehouse things. So it's like that was something I wasn't sure we would see until they showed him that there any of the supporting characters like.
And it was an odd little, like, he was just there.
Yeah,
And like they went up and talked to him, and he's just like, "Hey, Donkey Kong, see you later."
yeah.
Like,
It's
I was
like,
just like,
okay.
"Why is Cranky Kong here? This is a mining town. This is a blue collar town. Like, DK's here for a reason. He's on a mission to get these bananas. Why is Cranky Kong here?" It didn't. Yeah, to me, like, as a Donkey Kong game, as a Donkey Kong franchise, the footage we saw didn't really come together in like a holistic way that made me say, "Oh, Donkey Kong."
Yeah, and like I it's one of those interesting things where like I I don't know what that would look like though. You know, like unless it was like very like we're on Kong Island and he's like hanging out with Cranky and Diddy and they're like running barrels and it's just like all of this stuff that I think about is like visual iconography, and the fact that it's like it's underground and there's rock monsters and there's all these like different new things. It's like, yeah, like it kind of doesn't necessarily feel like Donkey Kong the way that like the Universal Park that you mentioned, like quote unquote, feels like Donkey Kong. But again,
Yeah,
we'll probably see other levels where like that is the case, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if we get a cameo from Diddy or King K. Rool or something like that. I don't know.
yeah. It is odd though that this game was introduced to us without a trace of the jungle in it.
Yeah.
Like, even if it was, a mining game and a mining setting, there's ways to incorporate what I think we've come to know as DK imagery, which is green jungles. And it's just totally absent. So it was a little jarring to see. Like, I love the gameplay footage that we saw, but the whole time I just was kind of like tilting my head, wondering when Donkey Kong was going to show up.
Yeah, it's definitely a way different flavor. Which again, I think is probably not a bad move when you consider everything that you said before, right? That like it does feel like DK is at a kind of a crossroads as a franchise where like they're trying to differentiate it more and give it more of its own identity. And I think having a game where you take a big swing and kind of try a lot of new, fresh stuff to see what works and what is things that people respond to for a sequel or what have you, is great because like you can always go back to that well, right? Like you can always, if they make, if this game's successful and we get a DK Bonanza 2, that can always be a more traditional environment, but with the same gameplay mechanic, whatever, right? Or something else.
Yeah, I guess the attempt is to make the character more approachable, not just like with the obvious right visual redesign, but I guess gameplay wise, video game wise.
Yeah, you don't need to
the
have
games have always
context.
they've always been kind of off the beaten path. It's either been very challenging platformers or like super oddball gimmick spin-off games. So this might be the big swing to make it, even though the character's always been like a huge part of Nintendo's identity.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the game series has been since the 90s.
I think it's like kind of similar to Metroid in that regard, right? Where it's like the iconography is very recognizable, and if you're a Nintendo person, like you have that connection to it on some level, but like it's never been.
So what you're saying, Pete, just for the record, you're saying this will be the Metroid Prime of Donkey Kong.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe the Metroid Dread. That's even better.
I was expecting like a really dramatic, bold, like, yes, I do.
Yes, I do. In this TED Talk, maybe. I will.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be the swing, and I appreciate the swing. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure I care if it doesn't feel like a Donkey Kong game. It looks like a really good game. If they're able to make it feel meaningful as a Donkey Kong game, great, but I'm not sure that's a prerequisite for me finding it very, very fun and worthwhile.
Yeah, I don't think that's that important. I think like when you get down to all those things we highlighted earlier where it's just like, yeah, I mean, I don't think the series has a super clear identity beyond visuals and iconography. And like I think a lot of that stuff at this point is dated. You know, it's like we have basically every piece of DK media continuing to ape a style that was ape a style. Nice. Trying to ape a style that was established.
You had that canned for like 3 weeks.
I wrote that down. Yeah, as soon as you said we were doing one.
Yeah, trying to act all like, oh my god, I can't believe I just thought of that. Been losing sleep over that
one. But like it's all copying a style that was established in 1994. You know, it's like it's not the 90s anymore, and I think that like, you know, wanting to find a new direction for Donkey Kong that is not in the shadow of Rare from the 90s or in the shadow of Mario, I think is the best thing if they really want to make DK stand out on his own.
Yeah. Also, hot take, I think 2D platformers kind of have a ceiling to a degree. Mario Wonder is a good counter argument to that.
Yeah.
Like, we thought we'd seen, you know, everything you can see with 2D Mario, and that game proved us dead wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But Mario Wonder, to me, is still a 2D Mario game. And I kind of know the ceiling of my enjoyment that I'm going to get from it. So, I love the Donkey Kong Country platformers, but I'm not sure that I would be, like, over the moon excited if that's the next entry that they went with for the series.
Yeah, it's like
I'd be excited. I would buy it, but I'm not sure that I would be as intrigued as I am by this strange on paper project.
Yeah, no, I totally agree because it's not a known quantity. You know, it's like and like I love 2D platformers, and like when we inevitably get another DK Country, I assume we will at some point. Yeah, like that'll be something that will be exciting. But honestly, I think it'll be more exciting in a post this game world, because I think it can, like, this game coming out and hopefully being one of the marquee titles on Nintendo Switch 2, I think will do a lot to, you know, renew interest in the brand, you know, and it won't just feel
weird.
like...
I feel like it's being really overlooked right now. And for some obvious reasons. Donkey Kong, like, no matter how good a Donkey Kong looks, it's not going to be the star of the internet, like, when that gets revealed.
Yeah,
and it's an unproven concept for a Donkey Kong game, so I get why it's kind of flying under the radar. But personally, Mario Kart World, I'm stoked for, and I know I'm gonna love. But I also feel like I know what I'm gonna get with that. I'm getting more excited about the open world stuff the more I see. I think it's gonna add more to the series than it first looked like, in a cool way. But this game looks wild. This is the one that I think could be the first, like, I'm so glad I have a Switch 2 game.
I agree. I'm more excited about this than I am about Mario Kart.
It could also be a huge failure. Like,
yeah,
that's also right. Like, the concept could never come together, and it's like just a game, and it's fine. But
I think knowing that it's got some of the same, you know, the pedigree behind it, right? Like being the Odyssey team, it's like I feel bullish that it won't turn out that way, but you never know. It's like I have more confidence than I would if it was just we had just seen this with no context of like who's the team behind it, because like I do think you're right that like just looking at it you can see the DNA of that game here, and I think that's a really good starting place for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, to your point, I think kind of the big question on my mind is like, can this game achieve a similar result to a Breath of the Wild or an Odyssey, where like in previews there is that little bit of reservation because we don't know what it is and we can only compare it to what's come before, and it's very different than what's come before. Whereas like once they came out, everyone was talking about them. They were really, really blowing up on social media because they were games that lent themselves to like interesting water cooler moments where you just look at this weird thing that I did, or I built this crazy thing or whatever. That's, I think, when you'll really get an idea of like how much of an impact this game is going to have, because I think it'll definitely have the benefit of being like the first new thing for you to play on your new Switch since launch, right? Like that.
For better or worse, yeah, it's gonna get plenty of attention.
Yeah.
It's the second and only other exclusive available on Switch 2 for a bit.
And yeah, and to your point, I guess that's the question. Like, because if this game slaps, I think that could really propel it to being like in the game of the year conversation, and like, you know, all of those benchmarks that you want to see a game like this hit, especially for one that's trying to like kick off a new franchise, right, or a new iteration of a franchise.
I think your original question was, could it like reach that pedigree of a Super Mario Odyssey or a Breath of the Wild? To be honest, like, unless the game is a masterpiece, like 10 out of 10,
yeah, that's what it has to be,
across the board masterpiece. I just don't think it has the benefit of having the name Zelda or Mario behind it. So yeah, even if the game's incredible, which I'm like moderately confident that it will be, and will be pleasantly surprised, I'm not sure if it's going to reach that level of hype, just because Donkey Kong does not have an attachment for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so interesting that they went this way instead of Super Mario Odyssey 2, which they know they could have sold in their sleep.
Yeah, and I guess to the a point that you've made in the past is like, if they feel that confident in it, that's probably a reason to sit up and pay attention. Like, if they're saying that this is our marquee launch title, it's like, okay, great.
Yeah, I've learned not to bet against them.
Yeah, prove to me why that's the case, right?
Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me 20 times.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Shame on me. Again, I guess.
So I guess final thoughts on this one. How do you think like, if you had to bet right now, how do you think the game is going to be received as the first kind of like boldly different Switch 2 game, in the way that the Switch 1 made a name for itself as having these really bold, dynamic new entries in classic franchises?
It's a tough question to answer. Just like pure gut feeling.
Yeah. Just listen to your heart.
I would say there is a good chance it will be perceived in the ballpark of Super Mario Odyssey. In terms of, I know that review scores are a silly thing, but they're important. It's what a lot of people check first.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's going to be in the, that low 90s ballpark.
Yeah.
Or I'm confident it can be. I'm leaving some room. Like, I think this could not come together. I think that's a very real possibility, but that is, like, if I'm looking at my scale, I'm 3 times more confident that it's going to be a surprise hit rather than.
If I was betting money, I would agree with you there. Yeah, just based on what we know about the team behind it, how long it's been in development, where they're positioning it.
I think the $70 too.
Sure.
Like, it's an unproven concept, and Nintendo doesn't always charge the premium for stuff that is, they're not entirely sure they have the market for.
And it's a franchise that, to your point, it doesn't have the name cachet of some of its other marquee titles. So the idea that they're like coming out and being like, no, this is worth it, and this is one of the games you're going to be most excited to play year one of Nintendo Switch 2, that does say something to me. That makes me a little more bullish about it than I think I would otherwise be. But yeah, point taken. Like, I think that's, I guess, the thing that's so interesting about this title is, like, I do think it has less pressure on it because it's not called Mario or Zelda, but I also think it, in a weird way, that makes it have more pressure on it too, because if it comes out and doesn't succeed, I think that greatly hurts the longevity of, more interesting, unique Donkey Kong games.
Cool, off the path Donkey Kong games.
Yeah.
It's also, I feel like it's pretty big for the year one perception of the Switch 2 as well. I know it's like a minority of grumpy little internet trolls who are still screaming about the price and stuff online and how ridiculous it is and how insulting. I know some of it's valid, and I know there's also a lot of people who, just without like the loud outbursts on Reddit, they do think it's too expensive and they're going to sit it out for a while. And I think if the second and only exclusive they have lined up for like the foreseeable launch window doesn't wow people, then once they sell through this initial pre-order stock, it might be a little bit slower than they're projecting.
Yeah, which I think those are all more reasons, I think, to assume that this game has heat and that, like, they think that it's a thing that's going to connect. Whether or not it does, I guess, remains to be seen. But
yeah, because Mario Kart World for $80, we've seen the reaction to that.
Yeah.
That it's not an overwhelming, I got to rush out and got to switch to. 2 hits within the first 3 months, I think, could be a different story.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, there's also, I think, the reality that, like, once it comes out, like, the narrative is going to change too, because people will have it and everybody will be talking about what's interesting. Like, if the console is good and the games are good, then the narrative will shift to it's good and it's worth the money. Right now, it's an easy target, you know?
Yeah. Although maybe not so easy now that everyone else is now raising their prices as well.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that will also
fired
probably
our guns
help
off too early.
Yeah, I think that'll also help that narrative.
Looking pretty cost efficient these days.
Yeah, right. The Xbox and PlayStation 5 both getting price hikes and everything. It's like, hey, we're still the cheapest game in town, baby.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I want to jump into the question block for a second here, but before that, let me give you a word from our sponsors. This episode was made with support from listeners like you on patreon.com/flipscreengames. If you enjoy our podcast, supporting us on Patreon will help us spend more time making content and get you access to Patreon exclusive perks like early access to ad-free versions of all of our podcasts, and exclusive content like the twice monthly After Dark podcast, where Steve and I will share funny personal stories, play games with each other, and more. And my daily Patreon show, The Daily Checkpoint, where every day I'll spend at least 10 minutes answering your questions or sharing my off-the-cuff thoughts on what I'm playing and what's going on in the video games industry. If you like what we do and want to go above and beyond to show your support, head over to patreon.com/flipscreengames today. And we're back. So we got a comment over on the Discord. This one came from LDLink16, who resonated with our Metroid Prime stories from last week when we were talking GameCube games. So I wanted to read his comments here. So he said, I really related to that story on the last episode about Metroid Prime. I bought the original game for GameCube close to release, so 22 years ago. I did make it past the tutorial area, but not that much farther. I was 14 years old at the time.
Much?
Yeah, right. We were 9, so we didn't have the game. So I was 14 at the time, and the scarabs and wasps in the Chozo ruins creeped me out way too much, so I stopped playing after getting the morph ball, and unfortunately never returned to it. Oh yeah, so that's like right after that, right? Then earlier this year, after having replayed all of the 2D Metroids in the past year besides Nestroid and 2, I had to give it another try, so I caved in and bought Metroid Prime Remastered and finished it just 2 weeks ago. I am, of course, proud of myself for finally finishing this 22-year journey, but more importantly, I had an absolute blast playing this. This is the coldest take ever, but Metroid Prime is truly a 10 out of 10 game, just like everyone says it is, and I'm so happy I finally got to experience it. I'm also excited to see Pete play Super Metroid on stream. That's another game I've played in the past for years for the first time that truly deserves all the praise it gets. My only issue with the game is how much better Samus controls on Zero Mission and Fusion, and the annoying switching between weapon types. Otherwise, it would be a perfect game. I'm definitely playing it again, though. The map design and environmental storytelling in Super Metroid are second to none. So yeah, have you played Super Metroid? I can't remember. You said no, right?
I have not beaten Super Metroid. I've started it. Big Metroidvanias where I have to remember and backtracking. My brain's just not good at it.
Yeah.
So the more modern stuff like Dread was
I loved
Dread. Metroid Dread. Yeah, Super Metroid I plan to revisit at some point, but just not my thing for neurological reasons.
Yeah, I definitely get it. That's always, I think, been part of my turn off with Metroidvanias. It's just like I'm not super wired for them in that way. But
I get lost like in my own neighborhood, driving home from the convenience store. So I'm not the prime candidate.
The prime candidate. Oh yeah, you wrote that one down 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I wrote that on a napkin 4 years ago.
Yeah, I'm excited to give it a shot. I'm doing a stream with Max on Thursday where, and that's for our Nintendo Switch 2 fundraiser. So if you want to help the team pay for Nintendo Switch 2 stuff, come and hang out. But he was like, let's do a stream where you play the game for 90 minutes and then I'll play for like 15 and see if I can get as far as you did in that same amount of time, since I have no idea what I'm doing and he's played it like a dozen times through. So it'll be fun. We'll see. We'll see how well I do. But I definitely I really do want to do this with Prime remastered. Like I picked it up when it came out last year, I think, but never got around to actually like playing it. And I really would like to. Like I am excited for 4, and I feel like a bit of a like that pull to be like, oh, I should play 1 through 3 first, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I played through 1. 2 is on my list. I'm going to get to it sooner than later. Whenever 4 comes out, I'm buying it day 1.
Oh, yeah. Same.
Just because Metroid Prime 1, and again, I played it as a 26 or 27-year-old adult. Whenever Prime 1 Remastered came out is when I played it for the first time. Mm-hmm. Still blew me away. Like, I appreciate you sharing, because I had pretty much the exact same experience with that game in particular and the series as a whole. And I'm really excited to see a new 3D Metroid entry after a very long wait for it.
Same. And I think in the same way that, like, it was really cool to see Dread come out after, you know, like, so many years, and the fact that, like, the Metroidvania genre is, like, the most popular it's ever been. It's really cool to see the, like, originator kind of come back and, like, you know, like, do a new take on it.
We're still the king, baby.
Yeah, and, like, get to see them.
Yeah, it was cool to see Nintendo flex and come back to, like, an old stomping ground and, you know, strut their stuff and add to the genre in a way that only a major publisher and one that knows good design inside and out can do.
I really hope that they approach Mercury Storm about acquiring them and just being like, you guys just make a Metroid every 4 years. Let's just let that roll, because that game is so good. I would take one of those like every generation in a heartbeat.
No.
So yeah, thanks for sharing, Link. I definitely, it was fun taking a little stroll down memory lane last week, and
thank you for letting us that we are not alone in our very, very specific and odd Metroid journey.
Exactly.
I didn't think I would ever find one person that could relate to that, and now I have found 2, and I appreciate you for that.
That's the beauty of this show. I think before we like wrap up for the day, like this does have me thinking a little bit, I guess, in the same context about Metroid, like with what we were talking about with DK, where like Dread really did kind of feel like a, you know, like a real like reestablishment of 2D Metroid as like a force to be reckoned with. And I'm very interested to see like what the reaction to Prime 4 is, and if they're able to elevate Metroid to being a marquee Nintendo franchise the way that I think it has always kind of deserved, but has never quite, like, it's so influential as a franchise, and the iconography is so iconic, but I don't think it's never been a big seller. It's never been, you know, a console mover the way that like a Mario, a Zelda, a
As
Pokemon.
of Dread, I would say that 2D Metroid has reached that pedigree.
Yeah, but that was the first one.
Yeah, 3D Metroid's not there yet because obviously we haven't had a game in 15 years.
Right.
So yeah, I would be over the moon if Prime 4 is able to achieve that and put it on the like in perpetuity, you know, pedestal of great Nintendo IPs you can expect every generation.
I think it would be really nice too, just because of how different it is. Like it fills so many niches, right, that like are just not really what you associate with Nintendo. Like it's made for a slightly more mature audience. It's got like the first person angle to it. It's, you know, it's a more mature title. And like as much as I really vibe with the more cartoony, all ages, family friendly stuff that they do, I would like to see a world where, there are maybe a couple Nintendo franchises that have that same level of approach to creativity and novelty in design, but that are a little bit more, aimed at that teenager audience, right? And older, right? Like, so that, you can kind of feed all those different types of players that you attract to the device,
Yeah. At the same time, I feel like we've been talking about how this past decade of Nintendo, right, has been defined by just a fierce, dedicated commitment to expanding on the ways that we explore and get rewarded for exploring. And I can't think of a better candidate to kind of be the pinnacle of that than Metroid Prime.
For sure.
Like, it could be a really huge game. And the sum of a lot of inspired design that's been occurring through the past 8 to 10 years through the life cycle of the Switch.
I'm very interested to see what that team does now too, right? Like returning to Metroid Prime after so long, and like with all of the, development of the Metroidvania genre in the indie space over the years, like you got to imagine that they've had moments over the last couple decades where they're like, what a cool idea. Or, if we were going to do another one, I would learn from this thing from Axiom Verge or Hollow Knight or whatever. Right. And it's interesting. There's a lot of talent there.
Yeah.
It's going to be an exciting couple months for sure.
Yep.
So, folks, let us know in the comments down below what you're thinking about all of the big games we're looking forward to that aren't Mario Kart. How are you feeling about DK Bananza? How are you feeling about Metroid Prime 4? Because I got to tell you what, looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a pretty exciting time. So let us know in the comments down below. Head over to flipscreen.games. That's the website where you can get our sister shows, the Flipscreen Games podcast and the Steam Deck podcast. You can join our Discord. You can write into the show and get your thoughts right on the air like LD Link did. And a bunch of other stuff that you can do. And remember, of course, for the entire month of May, we are going to be streaming on our YouTube channel and maybe on Twitch. We were on Twitch over on Sierra's channel last night. So we'll have a schedule up every week that you can keep up with and come and join us for a bunch of fun variety streams. All of the proceeds for the entire month are going to go to helping the team offset the costs of Nintendo Switch 2 or hardware or software so that we have the ability to cover whatever you guys want to hear us cover on this show. So if that at all sounds interesting to you, if you're a fan of the show and you want to go above and beyond and show your support, there's a bunch of ways you can do that. They're all in the links down below, however you choose to do so. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Nintendo Noise. And then, of course, I want to extend a very special thank you to our Patreon producers for the month of May. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobe, Project Julian, Steve Stompy, Susan Still Likes Cats and Also Boobies, That One Kid Nick, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You're all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Jack. We'll see you next week.